Hey guys, how's it going? Jay here. Welcome back to the channel. So we have the long-awaited Terminator and the Terminator Plus review in here. The Denafrips DACs, the top-of-the-line DACs are in here. And I'm very excited for this one because the Denafrips Ares 2 won the best award. The Pontus won the best award. So now my expectations for the top-of-the-line DACs, which is literally a size of amplifiers, and I'm not joking, they're literally heavy. And if you see this is not like a DAC, it's an amplifier size. So for such a big DAC and for the price tag, does it offer way more than the Ares 2 and the Pontus? That is the question we're going to answer today. And also, we'll have a special comparison at the end of the video. So make sure to click that subscribe button and click that bell notification so you don't miss anything, because we're getting straight into it. So as you know, the Terminator and the Terminator Plus does not use off-the-shelf DAC chips like the Sabre and the AKM and a lot of the famous ones out there. They don't use that. They use ladder DACs, R2R. Now the Ares 2 was R2R, the Pontus was R2R, and Denafrips is an R2R DAC company. Now given that, what has changed from the Ares to the Pontus to the Terminator? Well, the Ares 2 and the Pontus, the precision level of the resistors was the same. Now the Terminator and the Terminator Plus has a more precise resistor. Now this really translates into the sound being a little bit more cleaner, at least from my experience. And both of these DACs having the same resistors, what are the sound differences? Well, we'll get into that. But main difference between these two units in terms of aesthetics is that the front panel on the Terminator Plus has a little groove while the Terminator doesn't. Now on the back, all the inputs are fairly similar, except that now the Terminator Plus has a clock out for certain applications with certain transports and etc. that you can use. I'm not gonna go deeper into that, but the main thing is the connectors and the connections are practically the same as far as most people are concerned. Now in the front, we practically have again the exact same choices. The inputs, the non-oversampling mode and the oversampling mode, and we'll talk more about that in the later part of this video. But all in all, aesthetic wise and in terms of inputs and output choices is very similar unless you want that clock out on the Terminator Plus. So that won't be the most decision-making factor for most people. So the Terminator Plus now has full separation between the digital signal section and the analog section. Now it also has the oven-controlled crystal oscillator instead of the Crystec femtoclocks, and many little tweaks to reduce noise and extra grounding. The power supply unit on the Terminator Plus has been now redesigned and improved from the Terminator. And now supercapacitors for digital and analog circuitry are used for high energy storage to ensure supply of constant, cleaned DC power to the circuitry. Now let's get straight into the sound because that's what we're here for. Now, the Ares 2 had this airy presentation that I really liked. Pontus was a little bit of a surprise for me because the Pontus was a little bit more warmer in tone instead of having more air. So that was a bit of a surprise for me. But overall, I was very impressed with the Pontus, as you know. Now the Terminator is like what I would have expected from the Pontus, meaning it has that air, it has that warmth, it has practically everything that I would expect from a top-of-the-line DAC from Denafrips. Now, in terms of the value proposition here, because I know some of you, say, well, the Pontus was 5 times the price performance. How about the Terminator? Does it compete with $25,000 DACs? Well, yes and no. The Terminator is one of the best DACs that I've ever reviewed, objectively speaking, on this channel. The separation, the detail retrieval, everything about it is better. It's better than the Dodge 7. It's better than the Pontus. It's better than the Ares 2. Objectively speaking, anyone who has heard these side by side would say the Terminator outperforms others. And how good it is really subjective. But for me, I would take the Terminator over the MSB Premier any day. And that's a big statement. Now, perhaps some of you may be like, oh no, the MSB is much better. How can a $5,000-ish DAC possibly compete with a $10,000 DAC? Well, in reality, if you go through the classic distribution and dealership chain, then the Denafrips Terminator is not very far off from a $10,000 DAC. So it is able to compete in that category. And for me, the sound signature, the overall smoothness, the analogish sound is really attractive. And for me, it tops even the MSB Premier in my mind and heart when it comes to music. So how about the Terminator Plus? Well, the Terminator Plus takes even that, and it's really hard to explain because you hear the Terminator, you're like, how does it get better than this? Well, you take that and you improve it even further in detail and in imaging. So when you hear the Terminator Plus, especially with well-recorded tracks, you hear everything. Pinpoint, just the detail retrieval is fantastic on this DAC. Now, needless to say, if you have the Terminator already, that's already a very good DAC. It doesn't really mean that you have to upgrade to the Terminator Plus right now. The Terminator Plus really scales with your system. So meaning the crazier your system, the bigger difference you will hear between the Terminator and the Terminator Plus. So I've heard personally a difference between, all my speakers, $500 all the way up to $10,000 something dollars. I heard the difference on all of them, except I heard more of a difference as I went around $5,000 and above speakers and system. And this is a kind of general thing, it's not for every speaker. Your $5,000 speaker may be not so evident or revealing, but as you go up in price, the chances are you're gonna end up having a more revealing reference system. And that's the situation where you hear the bigger differences between the Terminator and the Terminator Plus. One being more quiet, more nuance, more micro detail, the Terminator Plus, and the Terminator, which is a little bit more smoother, not as quiet, but arguably more analog sounding for some people. Now, for the Terminators, I'm talking about both of them, I like them on the oversampling mode. And this may come across as a surprise for some of you because I don't like oversampling. But on this DAC, or DACs I should say, the Terminator and the Terminator Plus, the oversampling mode makes sound more open. The soundstage just opens up more. It's just the soundscape, it just gets larger, it's grander, and it just gets smoother, which is not typical of oversampling. I don't know exactly, I'm not gonna pretend I know all the technicalities behind it, but what I hear is so obvious, it's not a small change. The oversampling mode is clearly better, at least to my ears, while the non-oversampling mode actually seems a little bit drier. And I see why some people say the Terminator and the Terminator Plus is a little bit clinical because, yeah, on the non-oversampling mode, it is a little bit tad dry. So depending on the system, you could say that it's a little bit analytical. You could feel that. I can probably agree with that depending on the system and the matching. But when you have the oversampling mode on both of these DACs, I don't feel that is analytical in any way or form. The brightness or analytical feeling is gone. It still retains that pinpoint imaging and that sparkle, but it just smooths it out along with the soundscape. Imagine like an elastic band that kind of stretches it out a little bit. That's what you feel with it. And I really like that. And that's going to be the basis of what I'm talking about in this review with the DACs because that's what I stayed at for the most part because that's what I liked. Now, in comparing with something like the Ares 2, there's no comparison. I'm sorry. The Ares 2 is an excellent DAC, of course, but the airiness, the detail retrieval, Ares 2 gives you a slight taste of that, a taste of what the Terminator can do. And the Pontus also gives you a little bit more of a taste of that. But the funny thing is, I feel like if you combine the Ares 2 with the Pontus, then that's what you kind of get with the Terminator and the Terminator Plus. So I find that very interesting. Like the sound signature, you kind of mix it up, the best of both, and that's what you get with these DACs. And that's essentially what it is. You get a large, airy sound, beautiful imaging, pinpoint, everything about it is just hard to nitpick and say, well, this could be better, especially when you have the oversampling mode turned on. Now, comparing it with the Dodge 7, the big question, right? I raved about that DAC. It's a tube DAC, has a large sound stage. Again, it has that pinpoint imaging. Great DAC. Now, I would have to say, objectively speaking, the Terminator and the Terminator Plus, there is no competition. These are better built. And if you remember, the 3 things that I said in that review that is important in the DAC. The DAC implementation, the DAC chip or the ladder or whatever, tube DAC, whatever DAC it is. The type of DAC. And then there's the power supply and the analog output stage. Well, if you look at the power supply of the Terminator and the Terminator Plus, I said as a joke to my friend, you could probably build an amplifier off of it. It is an enormous power supply. And that's one of the reasons the Terminator and the Terminator Plus is so big. And it's the size of an amplifier is because of the power supply. And you could argue, yeah, well, they could have made a separate chassis with it. And I agree. This way, this gives you the flexibility of upgrading the power supply if Terminator comes up with new ones. But then that would require a new chassis, just like MSB, and that would require extra cost added. And so they decided to go with one chassis. It is what it is. But point aside, that is why it's so big. So power supply, out of the question, it is much better than the Dodge 7 or the Pontus or the Ares 2. In fact, the power supply on the Ares 2 and the Pontus seems to be better than the Dodge 7, objectively speaking. Now, looking at the analog output stage. Well, the analog output stage on the Terminator is, objectively speaking, better than the Dodge 7. The Terminator Plus is even better than the Dodge 7 or the Terminator. So it gets even better and better. The Dodge 7 output stage, however, is special. And that's the key in the Dodge 7 DAC is that the output stage uses tubes. And so for those of you that like tube rolling, that tube sound, for the money, it is an excellent DAC. But in terms of the overall performance, the black background, the able to pinpoint imaging, the overall soundscape and the musicality, at least to me, objectively speaking, is better on the Terminator and the Terminator Plus without a doubt. And I know some of you are going to ask me, well, how does it compare to this DAC, that DAC? The truth is I haven't heard every DAC out there, and there's only so much I can compare. Down the line, if I decide to review more DACs in this price category like Kitsune or something like that, then I will compare it in that review. But for now, as it stands, if I had the money, if I had the funds, and if I had a choice of keeping one DAC in my system as reference, then the Terminator Plus would be it. I still like the Terminator for being a little bit more smoother than the Terminator Plus. The Terminator Plus is a little bit more quieter, it's blacker in the background, better with micro detail. But there's some smoothness about the Terminator that I really like, and I still really, really love that DAC because it's somewhere along like the Dodge 7 and the Terminator Plus hybrid, if you so will. So it's a really good sweet spot. But the overall, again, the objective performance, the micro details, if you have never heard it, you'll never understand. The Terminator Plus just gives you that little sparkle that you never heard in music before, and that adds to the musicality and the emotion that you feel when you listen to music. And when you hear the bass notes, there is no exaggeration. It is a pretty linear type of bass you hear, but the texture and the micro details in the bass is very apparent. And again, it's hard to explain if you have not experienced it. You experience this in MSB DACs for sure, and you experience this in many of the $20,000 DACs, but it is something that you don't quite experience in the $5,000 category. And I have yet to hear a DAC that does this in this price category so far. So needless to say, this is an incredible performing DAC for the money. And when it comes to bass, it is not lacking, but it is not over exaggerated. So if you're expecting to increase your bass by putting this DAC into your system, that is not what this DAC is going to do. It is probably a pretty neutral sounding DAC and with a little bit of sparkle on the top end and the mid-range. Just a little bit of magic, just sparkle. Now the only complaint that I have with this DAC is that it doesn't have a remote. Now, I usually don't need a remote with a DAC because usually you just turn it on and just leave it on. But because it has the option to change from oversampling to non-oversampling, it would have been nice to have a little remote where I can switch back and forth. And also you can change the phase here. I usually just leave the phase on, which is at 0 degree. But again, it would be nice to have that switch back and forth to compare depending on the track you're listening to. Other than that, I really don't have much caveats in terms of its design. So overall, yes, I definitely recommend the Terminator and the Terminator Plus in oversampling mode especially, and it earns my highest recommendation. So that's pretty much it from me. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe if this video was helpful to you, and consider subscribing to our Patreon to keep us independent and keep these honest videos and reviews coming. Until next time.